Canon Dr Angus Richie is also with us, who is a Executive Director of the Centre for Theology and Community in East London, and also an Anglican priest, associate priest at, are you priest at Katherine, Cree and at St George in the East, Father Angus?
Yes, for my
because you haven't got enough else going on.
Or whatever.
And also Angus
or not sins, it's a joy.
Yeah, quite, yes. Angus is also an author of many books and has been a long-standing pioneer and campaigner for the living wage, working with East London churches since 1980s?
1998.
1990, okay, I'm making you sound like you're older than you are. 1990. Anyway, so I'd love to hand over to Angus now, who's going to talk a little bit with us about why this should be something that churches should be involved in. And so Angus, if it's okay, over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for your interest in thinking all of this through. There's a great Twitter thread from Citizens UK this week that I'd really, if you have a chance to have a look at, I'd recommend, which goes through the history of the living wage campaign, where it started from. Yeah, I am long enough in the tooth, Alison, to have remembered it from the start. So that you're right. And it's really important to stress that it is a campaign that started out of testimony from institutions, various institutions, but at the heart of that were churches. And so the testimony was from churches about the impact of poverty wages on their own members and on their neighbours. Sister Una, who was at St Angela's Catholic School in Forest Gate, one of her bits of testimony was of a child who had written that it felt to the child as if their mother was dead, because the child, its experience was that the mother was so absent because she had to do so many shifts at different jobs to earn enough money to bring the family up. So parents were having to choose between having enough time for their children to feel present at all and having enough money to bring them up, to feed them, to clothe them. Other churches' testimony was also about the fact that when people are on low wages with multiple shifts, that also makes it difficult for them to participate in church life and in community life. So there's something about what the living wage makes possible in terms of well-being of individuals and of families, and in terms of participation in church and community. And for me, that's really a significant feature of the living wage, that it is a cry for justice that comes from the heart of the church. On Monday night, we had very moving service here at St Katherine, Cree, where most of the congregation were care workers, some on minimum wage, some on a living wage. And it was, again, a really powerful sense that this cry for justice was coming from the heart of the church's life, and that care workers and cleaners, among others, are really, when they talk about this, one thing that always strikes me is the living wage is also about enabling them to fulfill their vocation. When cleaners are asked what you want in your job, as Clean for Good has done, they want to have a workload that is doable well and be trained to do it well, and have a number of hours work that means they can get up in the morning and do a job well, as all the other things that that money brings. They want it to be possible for cleaning to be a vocation. That's something that care workers, again, were saying very clearly on Monday night, that we feel called to do this, and that in order to do this, the number of hours and the way we're paid and the workload needs to enable this to be our vocation. So this comes out of the church's listening to its own members and its practical care for its neighbours. That is, and those themes, I think, go right through the scriptures of what it is for those at the sharp end of economic injustice to be treated with dignity and with justice. I'd the verse that comes, there's so many verses you could quote at this point, but 1 John 3:17, how does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? This is part of that response. I think secondly, therefore, it's for me as a Christian leader, it is part of what it is for the church to bear witness. If you look at how Jesus behaves in the Gospels, there's a really interesting interweaving of embodying a good news, which is about justice, about healing, about inclusion, and proclaiming it. People have an experience of something being transformed, as well as transformation being talked about. And the Ugandan Catholic theologian Emmanuel Katongole has this phrase I love about the church being a sacrament of God's social repair. So the church being not the only place where this kind of repair is happening. And one of the powerful things about the Living Wage campaign is just how broad an alliance the church is one part of with other institutions, mosques, schools, trade unions, charities. But we're part of our calling is to be a visible sign of God's reweaving of the social fabric. And so it's really important that we are living this out as well as talking about it. And I guess that's where accreditation as well becomes so significant. Accreditation is important because it's about a long-term commitment. It's about a covenant that says, I'm not just doing this year, this is how we are going to behave towards one another, which is, I think, is important both in itself, but also is really important for the ways that the church acting this out makes the whole movement more powerful. Because one thing that employers can do when they're under the microscope, when there's a bit of pressure, well, you're not paying your workers a living wage, is to say, well, actually, this year we are. And actually, yes, that's good. But in that moment, when there's a focus, whether it's on supermarkets or hospitals or hotels or whichever sector the Living Wage campaign has a particular focus on, what we want to be doing is not just meaning that year those workers get the wage they deserve and they need to flourish, but that something is embedded that will last. And accreditation achieves that. If we can get a supermarket chain to accredit, then we haven't just won something while everyone's looking at it. We've won something for the long term. And obviously we can go back and look if it de-accredits, but that helps the campaign to achieve something which is powerful and sustainable. So there's something really significant about what is, no doubt in the midst of everything else can feel like quite a tiresome piece of admin. But I would say if part of what a church is doing is living this out, then that little extra piece of work it has a real impact in adding to that sense of movement and momentum and example. So yeah, just really those three things. First of all, this comes out of the testimony, the experience of Christians who are on the sharp end of this. I know neighbours who are on the sharp end of it. It's a cry from within the church. Secondly, doing this seems to me to embody something of how Jesus proclaims and embodies the kingdom. It's something people encounter through having it lived out as well as talked about. And thirdly, accreditation is about a kind of covenant commitment and faithfulness that says we are in this way of treating people for the long term. And when we model that, we play our part in helping the living wage movement to make sure other employers embody it too.